Right, so for decades, the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, enjoyed a rare kind of immunity, an organisation with the outward appearance of a benign charity, planting trees and developing land in Israel, all while quietly playing a central role in the dispossession of Palestinians and the laundering of apartheid policies. In tandem, institutions like AIPAC in the United States and influential donors such as Sir Trevor Chinn in the United Kingdom operate behind the scenes to cement Israel's impunity on the world stage, pumping money, influence and political insulation into Western democracies. But the facade is cracking, because you see, this week the Canadian government rubber-stamped the revocation of the JNF's charitable status, after 2 appeals citing violations of international law and domestic charity regulations. Days later, thousands of protesters surrounded AIPAC events in major US cities, demanding accountability for the group's role in arming and legitimising Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza. In the UK, investigative revelations laid bare how half of Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet had received donations linked to Trevor Chinn, a long-time donor with close ties to Zionist institutions, not least of which the JNF. This is not merely a series of scandals, it's all interconnected. It is the unravelling of an entire architecture of transnational influence. What once operated with near total impunity, using philanthropy as camouflage, antisemitism smears as weapons, and political donations as leverage, is now being exposed to legal scrutiny, political backlash, and growing public contempt. A long overdue reckoning with the Zionist lobby's power is finally underway. Right, so founded in 1901 by Theodor Herzl's World Zionist Organization, the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, was established to facilitate Jewish land acquisition in what was then Ottoman-ruled Palestine. When we talk about Israel's actions in Palestine going back decades, and certainly I say this a lot when we mean before October 7th of 2023, the truth is everything we're seeing in the here and now literally predates Israel itself by decades. The JNF's guiding principle was simple, yet devastating. Land purchased by the organisation was to be held in perpetuity for Jews only, and non-Jews, read Palestinians, would be explicitly excluded. The JNF thus became the real estate arm of Zionism, playing a central role in establishing Jewish-only settlements, displacing Palestinians, and entrenching ethno-national segregation as a foundation of statehood. Yet despite this, the JNF successfully branded itself internationally as a charity. Its campaigns for forestation and land development attracted global donors, especially in Western democracies, who were often unaware or willfully ignorant of the organisation's true mission. In Canada, as in other countries, donors received tax deductions for contributions that ultimately funded the creation and expansion of settlements illegal under international law. The Canadian government's decision this week to revoke the JNF's charitable status at the end of their latest failed appeal therefore marks a watershed moment. The 120-year-plus actions of the JNF and its pretense of charitable status is falling apart as the truth can no longer stay hidden. As reported by Press TV, Canadian authorities cited JNF's use of tax-deductible donations to finance projects on occupied Palestinian land, including settlement infrastructure and displacement operations against Bedouin communities in the Negev region. The revocation came after years of campaigning by civil society groups, including Independent Jewish Voices Canada and Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. According to the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, some establishment Jewish organisations attempted to portray the move as a threat to Jewish life in Canada, because of course they did. Conflating Judaism with Zionism seems to be a pastime for some people. Yet such framing fails under legal and moral scrutiny. Canada's laws explicitly bar charitable organisations from funding violations of international law, and the JNF's activities clearly cross that line. More than a legal decision, the ruling represents a collapse of the JNF's carefully constructed mythology. The trees planted by the JNF often concealed the ruins of ethnically cleansed villages such as Inwaz and Yalu. The parks built with foreign donations often served as playgrounds for Israeli settlers and soldiers on expropriated Palestinian land. The JNF's mask of benevolence has now been publicly stripped, therefore, and the consequences may now go global. One of the JNF's most egregious acts has been its use of environmental projects to obscure the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. A striking example is Canada Park, built over the ruins of 3 Palestinian villages, Imwaz, Yalu and Beit Nuba, bulldozed by Israel during the 1967 war. The park was funded heavily by JNF Canada, whose donors received tax deductions for contributing to what was essentially the cover-up of war crimes. Trees, picnic sites, hiking trails replaced the homes and livelihoods of thousands of Palestinians, many of whom still live as refugees. The JNF's role in creating such parks is not a side activity, it is central to a broader project of demographic erasure. These forests serve multiple purposes. They prevent Palestinian return, legitimize Israeli territorial claims, and offer a palatable face for international fundraising. The illusion of ecological stewardship distracts from the deeply colonial nature of the JNF's operations. Canada's revocation of the JNF's charitable status is grounded in both domestic charity law and international legal principles. Under Canadian law, charitable status is conditional on the organisation's purposes being exclusively beneficial to the public and not contrary to public policy or international obligations. By funding settlement infrastructure in the occupied West Bank, the JNF breached both. Furthermore, these activities contradict Canada's official foreign policy, which recognises the illegality of the Israeli settlements. Internationally, the JNF's work violates Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits the transfer of an occupying power's population into occupied territory. Legal scholars have argued for years that by facilitating such transfers and displacements, the JNF may be complicit in grave breaches of international law, including war crimes. While the JNF has historically handled the territorial and demographic engineering of Israel's Zionist project, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has served as its political shield in Washington. For decades, AIPAC operated as the most powerful foreign policy lobbying group in the US, responsible for ensuring the annual $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, blocking any meaningful congressional support for Palestinian rights, and using dark money to oust progressive candidates. But that dominance is now under siege as well. Again, in the last week, amidst Israel's catastrophic genocide of Gaza going on, massive protests erupted outside AIPAC-sponsored events, with demonstrators demanding investigations into AIPAC's complicity in war crimes. According to Press TV, protesters carried placards reading "War Criminal AIPAC" and "Arrest Netanyahu," highlighting the clear financial and political link between American military aid and the devastation in Gaza. AIPAC's political strategy has also backfired. Its super PAC spent tens of millions during the 2022 to 24 election cycles to defeat progressive candidates critical of Israel, most notably Representatives Ilhan Omar and Jamal Bowman. While this brute force tactic succeeded in several districts, it also sparked a nationwide debate about foreign interference, campaign finance corruption, and the limits of donor influence. Increasingly, mainstream liberal voters now see AIPAC not as a legitimate lobby, but as a domestic enforcer for a foreign apartheid regime. Moreover, AIPAC's attempts to conflate criticism of Israel with antisemitism are losing credibility, especially amongst young American Jews. Organisations like Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and Students for Justice in Palestine have successfully reframed the debate, shifting the focus from security to structural racism, dispossession, and genocide. For the first time in decades, AIPAC's invulnerability has been punctured, and the backlash is only growing. Here in the UK, the intersection of charity, lobbying and foreign policy is epitomised by figures like Trevor Chinn, a major political donor with deep connections to the Zionist lobby. As documented by Declassified UK, Chinn has served on the boards of numerous pro-Israel groups, including BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, and Labour Friends of Israel, and was a major backer of Keir Starmer's leadership campaign, one of those donors he wouldn't admit to until after he'd conned Labour members out of their votes that he was continuity Corbyn. According to another Declassified UK investigative report, Chinn and his affiliated networks have donated to over half of Starmer's cabinet, including prominent figures such as David Lammy, Wes Streeting and Rachel Reeves. These donations come with strings attached. This isn't money being given for nothing. They want a return here, don't they? Unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself, silence on Gaza, and refusal to recognise Palestinian statehood. That kind of thing. What makes Chinn's influence particularly alarming is not just the money, it's the normalisation of lobbying practices that directly contradict British public sentiment and international law. At a time when Israel is facing allegations of genocide, UK political leaders are parroting Tel Aviv's talking points while accepting money from figures like Chinn. This is not democracy or democratic policy making, it is ideological outsourcing. Chinn's familial connection to the JNF, his father Rosser Chinn was once president of JNF UK, further underscores the deep institutional entanglements between seemingly charitable organisations and political influence networks. As reported by SharePost, Chinn has also acted as a kingmaker, funding anti-Corbyn organisations and shaping the Labour Party's pivot towards unconditional support for Israel. The simultaneous crises engulfing the JNF, AIPAC and key UK donors like Chinn becoming more and more exposed are not isolated episodes. All are interwoven and interconnected. They are manifestations of a deeper systemic unravelling of a transnational Zionist lobbying architecture that has operated largely unchecked for decades. This network is defined by shared objectives like defending Israel's impunity, deflecting scrutiny through accusations of antisemitism, and manipulating Western political systems to prevent any accountability for Israeli crimes. The JNF's environmental facade masked settler colonialism. AIPAC's democratic veneer cloaked electoral manipulation and militarism. Chinn's philanthropy served as a cover for ideological control. Together, these actors helped sustain a desired consensus that Western support for Israel was morally righteous, politically essential, and above criticism. But now their coordination is being laid bare. The same donors that fund JNF projects and illegal settlements also bankroll political parties through shadowy campaign donations. The same institutions that silence Palestinian voices in universities lobby for anti-BDS laws in parliaments. And the same think tanks that launder Israeli talking points into Western media receive funding from individuals embedded in the very organisations now under scrutiny. As their credibility collapses, so too does their ability to operate in the shadows. The moral and political scaffolding that sustained them, built on post-war Holocaust guilt, Cold War geopolitics and neoliberal donor dependency, is buckling under the weight of a more critical, informed public. One of the Zionist lobby's most effective tools in stifling criticism has been the widespread promotion of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA definition of antisemitism. While originally intended to identify genuine hate speech, the IRA's controversial examples have been used to conflate criticism of Israel with antisemitism, chilling free speech across campuses, cultural institutions, and public discourse. Organisations aligned with AIPAC and JNF have pushed aggressively for the adoption of this definition at institutional and governmental levels in the UK, Canada, and the US. This strategic weaponization has led to the censorship of Palestinian narratives, the cancellation of events, and the targeting of academics and artists critical of Israeli policy. However, legal and civil liberties organisations, including Jewish and Palestinian voices, have mounted a growing challenge to this manipulation. The backlash has sparked a wider conversation about the limits of legitimate political discourse and the dangers of equating anti-Zionism with racism. The fallout from these exposures opens the door to more than just moral condemnation. It invites serious legal and political consequences that could permanently alter the influence of Zionist lobbying organisations in the West. In Canada, the JNF's revocation sets a legal precedent. Other countries, including the UK and Australia, have similar statutory restrictions on charities funding foreign human rights abuses. If pressure builds, their charity commissions could follow suit. Already, organisations like Stop the JNF UK are renewing calls for deregistration based on JNF's links to settlement expansion and ethnic cleansing in light of this Canada ruling. In the US, questions are mounting about whether AIPAC should be registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, which requires lobbying groups working on behalf of foreign governments to disclose their activities. AIPAC has long argued it is an independent organisation, but as its funding, messaging and goals align seamlessly with those of the Israeli state, the claim is wearing thin. Campaign finance reform advocates are also demanding stricter rules around donations from lobbyists tied to foreign policy interests. If politicians continue to accept money from individuals and entities implicated in violations of international law, their accountability will become an issue not just of public trust, but of legal consequence. In the UK, new scrutiny is being placed on how political donations are used to shape foreign policy. Civil society groups are calling on for mandatory transparency on political gifts tied to lobbying on foreign conflicts. Trevor Chinn's influence and those of his ilk may become a test case for broader reform. Finally, international legal bodies such as the International Criminal Court are monitoring developments. If evidence emerges that charitable donations from Western countries are directly funding war crimes or apartheid policies, it could open legal avenues for prosecution under universal jurisdiction statutes. Public sentiment is rapidly shifting. Polling across the US, UK and Canada consistently shows rising skepticism towards Israeli policies, especially amongst younger generations, progressive voters, and Jewish communities alienated by the weaponization of their identities. Traditional media outlets, long reluctant to challenge Zionist narratives, are being outpaced by independent journalists, social media, and citizen reporting from the ground, so don't forget to support your favourites to help them keep on going and doing that. Mainstream anchors who once parroted Israeli talking points are now facing pushback from audiences demanding truth and balance. Documentaries, leaked footage and survivor testimony from Gaza have shifted the Overton window. What was once, not so long ago either, utterly taboo, labelling Israel as an apartheid regime, is now a position echoed by major human rights organisations, UN experts and respected commentators, as well as widely being discussed in public discourse. The collapse of the JNF's charitable status in Canada the surging protests against AIPACs, the exposure of donors like Trevor Chinn as significant blows to Zionist influence, propaganda and impunity. For too long, institutions that should have upheld ethical standards, charity commissions, political parties and mainstream media outlets turned a blind eye to the realities of ethnic cleansing and occupation so long as they were laundered through the right lobbyist, donor or environmental campaign. But the era of silence is ending. Citizens are demanding that their taxes no longer subsidise apartheid, voters are rejecting the corruption of their democracy by foreign-aligned money, activists are exposing the structural links between greenwashed colonisation, weaponised philanthropy and ideological bribery. And legal frameworks are beginning, slowly but decisively, to catch up. This reckoning is long overdue. Democracies have been subverted by all of this and are in need of correction. And while it will face fierce resistance, it carries the promise not only of justice for Palestinians, but of renewed integrity in the democratic systems long warped by Zionist exceptionalism. If the JNF can fall in Canada, it can fall elsewhere. AIPAC can be held accountable, and donors like Chinn can be further exposed. Then perhaps the world is beginning to see through the charade that little bit more, and to imagine something more honest, more just, and far less beholden to the machinery of occupation, and ultimately it all leads to being better positioned to hold Israel to account for its crimes. It isn't just through the masquerade of charitable status that Zionist influence is taking a battering, though. It's happening at governmental level too, as the Hague group of global South nations committed to taking on Israel for its impunity are set to meet next week, not just for tea and crumpets or whatever they plan on serving, but to plan real meaningful action that they as a collective are going to bring to bear on Israel. Words that will result in deeds is the claim, and therefore bears a close watch. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.